Hello, everyone. So this trip was taken in September of 2019. So it's recent, but not that recent. Obviously, as Derek mentioned, we haven't been able to get out too much. So this is as recent as we can get right now. So I'm going to be talking about two different places in Brazil, Jericoacoara and Jalapão. Um, so if anyone is not familiar with Brazil, it is this large country that takes up almost 50% of South America. And it's quite big. And I don't know if many of the people here on this call are from the US. So this is kind of an approximation of the size of Brazil compared to the US. So it is very big. And so you can see that to get from one side to the other is almost equivalent of going from the US from one side to the other as well. Um, so most of the time, when people think of Brazil, they think of Rio, which is where this area is, or this arrow is pointing, or Sao Paulo, which is where this arrow is pointing, or Brasilia, the capital, which is famous for being a planned city, which is here. But if you can see, that is kind of in the same little area, and the rest of the country is still really, really big. So there's actually a lot to explore in Brazil. So I ended up going to the north. I wanted to see Jericoacoara, which is a town up in the north coast, and then going to Tocantins, which is kind of compared to the outback um, in Australia, but this is obviously in Brazil. And so we were going to Tocantins is the state, and Jalapão is the park. So this is zooming in on the north coast of Brazil. I took a flight from Miami, Fortaleza, which is a city of about 3 million people. My flight arrived at about 1 in the morning. And then I still needed to get to Jericoacoara, which is this beach that's up and a little bit disconnected from everything. So I had to take a bus, and the bus then took about 7 hours to get to Jijoca, which is a little town that's kind of close. So that was a 7 hour bus ride. On the bus ride, so you start going through the Brazilian countryside. These are just some random pictures of some places I got. Most of the way I was sleeping. It was dark. I left really early. But this kind of gives you an idea and sets up kind of the landscape of what you'll see in the north. So we stopped for breakfast at this random castle that somebody built as kind of a tourist trap. It was kind of actually kind of cool. We went in for breakfast. So one of the things that they had there was, regular breakfast food like pastry, fruit, or coffee. But then they had something that's a specialty of northeastern Brazil. So they take the tapioca dough and they make it into, they put it on a hot griddle, and it congeals kind of like a tortilla or a pancake. It's, and then they kind of put your choice of meat or cheese, or you can put whatever you want on it, kind of like a, some a pancake, but it's a bit more savory. So there I'm just kind of pointing out where the uncooked ones are. Some that were prepared ahead of time, and then they just reheat them when you come and you order your food. And yeah, there's the meat. So this is the one that I had. I just had some watermelon juice, and I had chicken and cheese in my tapioca. So we had to kind of keep driving still. This is more just countryside. And when you get to Jijoca, after about 2 hours after the breakfast, you have to transfer to one of these 4x4 trucks. Um, so Jijoka's on the edge of what it is a national park. You can kind of see it here in this map. And so Jijoka is there. You get on this 4x4 truck, which goes up through the national park to Jijoka, which is, sorry, to Jeri, um, which is the shorter name for Jericoacoara. That is where the beach is. So the reason this is a national park and why we have to transfer to a truck versus a bus is because it's all sand dunes. So once we get beyond that town, it's all just sand dunes the whole way. So everything needs to go through these sand dunes. As you can see in this one, somebody's taking a refrigerator on the back of this, and it's got to get through the same way we do, going over all these sand dunes. So when you get to the town, there are no cars allowed. So there's a parking lot, a couple parking lots on the edge of the town where people park their cars. But once you get in, it's mostly just going to be buggies and people walking. So there was a small fishing village up until 1985 when they started promoting it internally inside of Brazil. And they started building up more infrastructure and more people started coming. But because it's inside of a national park, that's limited a lot of what they can build. As I said, no cars are allowed. So and getting there is a bit difficult, or it used to be at least. They've started making flight. Before it was always just overland. Now there's flights. There's an airport in Jijoca, so you can fly from Sao Paulo to Jeri, which makes it a lot easier to access versus, the 7-hour bus ride that I had to take. So in the town, there's a lot of these buggies. So there's drivers that just kind of hang out. They're waiting to take all the tourists around to a bunch of different places because there's a lot of different viewpoints that are around, and you need these buggies to get there. So this is the beach. What the beach looks like, it's a really long, wide beach. The water is really shallow for a long time. It's warm, it's clear, it's really, really nice. I forgot to mention that Jeri became famous because it's considered one of the 10 best beaches in the world. But it's not very well known. And so that kind of, at least outside of Brazil, so that the numbers here are kind of low when I went. And so when I was on that truck, that 4x4 truck going into the town, I met a guy named Wally. And so Wally and I hung out together that first day. So first we went to the beach. And then we kind of walked around the whole area. We kind of maybe walked around for maybe 2 hours or so. We ended up walking around the coast to, this is one of the viewpoints. It's called Pedra Furada, which means rock with a hole in it. So you can see that's kind of a huge tourist attraction that goes to take their pictures there. And it becomes even more popular as sunset comes. So here's all the people starting to arrive for sunset, and it's one of those places, there's always a line of people waiting to take their picture because they want to be there when the sun sets. But I was there earlier. We actually spent the day there on the beach, and there was almost nobody around until the very, very end of the day. So some people take horse carts up there because it's kind of a long way to walk, but that's just one of the options. I walked around. If you can see in the background behind the I don't know, the cart, you can see the coastline. That's how I got there. I walked all the way around. Sometimes we had to walk in the ocean. We had to jump over rocks. It was kind of a fun way to get there versus just taking the normal just path. At night, the town comes to life. There's lots of bars. There's lots of restaurants. You can see all the people just kind of hanging out. It's really cool. For dinner that night, I went and I had pizza. So this was right to us by the place we were staying at. So half of the pizza is chicken and corn, and the other half is a typical food in the Northeast region, which is carne de sol, which is meat that's been left out in the sun to dry, and I really, really like it. And if you notice, you can see that me and Wally are both wearing gloves to eat pizza. This is because there's one of these things that in Brazil, you're not supposed to touch the food with your hand. So you're supposed to either grab a napkin to grab a slice of pizza, or a fork and knife, or in this case, a glove. I had never had a glove before, but it was like everyone seemed to be eating with gloves like it was no big deal, but I just thought it was kind of funny. But here I am in the buggy the next day. Me and Wally got together and we paid one of these buggies to take us around to the different viewpoints. So a lot of the viewpoints have to be these lakes. They collect fresh water, so the rain collects in the dunes and it makes lots of lakes that are all over the place. And One of the things you do is that a lot of them have things like zip lines, or they have slides for you to slide down the dunes and into the water. They were quite cheap, so I actually did the zip line several times and the slide as well. And I would have kept doing more, but once you go down to come back up, you have to climb the sand dune. You can see there's like sandbags, that those are the stairs for you to climb back up. But it gets tiring doing it time after time. So I only did it about 6 times. And then I was like, all right, this is enough. I'm tired. Let's move on. So then you kind of get back in the buggy, you keep going because there's a place called Tatajuba, which has restaurants for you to get lunch. So we kept going. When we got there, there was a helicopter. So they offer rides for $50 US. The ride was about 10 minutes, which is really short, but it was kind of all you really need. And it was one of those things where they only fit 4 people, including the pilot, and another couple had already paid for it, so they needed one person. So I jumped up, I jumped aboard, and then I got. What? Well, I'll just let this go. So eventually, this will take off, and you get a little bird's eye view of the lake area. All right, so I don't know if the video came over well, if you guys were able to see it. Um,
A little choppy.
a little choppy. Okay, well, basically, it was just kind of showing just kind of where we take off. You see all these little lakes that are all over the place. From here, this is a different view of some of the places where there's the zip lines, where there's the slides. They're just kind of set up and they seem to be independent. Somebody goes and they set up their equipment and then people pay them. But it's just kind of showing an overview of the area that's just these little lakes that are kind of all over the place, spread over these sand dunes. And this is what the area Tatajuba looks like from above. These are all the different restaurants. People usually take these buggies and then they just might hang out there all day. The water there is really, really calm. It's fresh water. It's not, it's not salty. So it's nice. This happened to be a really windy day, as you can see from the hammocks that are kind of blowing in the wind and from the waves in the water, but usually the water is really calm and there aren't waves too much. So it's really a good place to hang out because the water is only about 3-4 feet deep in the deepest parts. So this is the return back to the town of Jeri. And this is just another view, just more sand dunes. The wind is blowing the sand at us. And there's also a guy that's starting to kite surf because this is a huge kite surfing area. There's a lot of people that kite surf internationally to this area because it's so famous. You're able to go, I think, something like 300 miles. You can just go up the whole coast with your kite surfing. So you people just stay in little towns and just go for a month or two, just kite surfing the whole day. And here we are getting back to the town. It's a little bit closer. You can see the town on the left, and then on the right, there's a big sand dune. That's what's called the Sunset Dune. So this is where everybody goes to see sunset because it faces right at the sun. So this was a little later from the town I was returning. This is where everyone and their mom is going to watch the sunset. So it gets really, really packed for sunset. Here's a guy that's selling caipirinhas. There's a couple of these guys that are selling, because people want to sit and have a drink as they watch the sun set. And here is just some random people, just as the sun was going down, everyone's, there taking pictures. Everyone's just kind of hanging out. It's a kind of a cool atmosphere. Everyone, enjoys just the time being there. And after sunset, I went back, and these are some people that I met at the hostel I stayed at. And so we all went to a party together. So we went to a forró, which is a music that's typical of Northeast Brazil. Um, so there's another video. Let me see. I don't know if it'll play, but let's just give it a try. So with the video, I just kind of wanted to give you a little bit of so you guys could hear the music and see what it was like. It probably came through choppy. I don't know if the audio came in clear, but it's just a little taste of what northeastern Brazil is like, because northeastern Brazil is kind of a different world um, amongst, Brazil itself. So then the next day, again with the same people, we ended up going to a beach club, which is, another place out on one of those lakes. So here I am just kind of resting on one of the hammocks. Um, the same thing, you just kind of hang out, lunch, have drinks, and just kind of relax. And then on the way back to the town, we just stopped at random sand dunes. And I like this a lot better than the beach clubs. Um, there was no infrastructure here, so you're just kind of running around and kind of doing your own thing. So I thought that was very, very cool. And right on the other side of this giant sand dune was kind of the highway. You can see all the cars that are driving by, and it's not even really a highway, it's just the path back to town. And then after that, we went and we just had drinks. We had dinner. Here it's a soda that's Jesus soda. It's nice and pink. It's it's supposed to taste like cloves, but it was really good. Um, and yeah, this was just kind of the beach itself in the town as well, uh, which I just really, really liked it. It was just kind of a very chill, very kind of, you're not doing too much. You just kind of hang out, go to the beach, go to the lake, and that's kind of what we do in that area. And then I just wanted to show my favorite food in Brazil, which is a coxinha, and it's like dough that's filled with chicken, sometimes with cheese, sometimes with other stuff. Again, I'm using the napkin to hold it because I'm not supposed to touch it. But that's something I really, really like. It's just, fried food in Brazil that I think is really, really tasty. And then that night we went to a different party. This party was at a hotel rooftop, at the rooftop bar. And this was obviously a much different crowd than the party the day before. So everyone, of course, is on their phones. Everyone's on Instagram. Everyone's catching the sunset. But this is the view from that rooftop looking at the sunset dune. So you can see all the people that are kind of going to see that sunset, that are all hanging out over there. And this party was really fancy. They had a mermaid. They had several DJs. Um, they just kind of went all night, brought out some people that were doing some light shows. They brought out some fire dancers. It was just kind of a very different type of party. This seemed like a bit more something that I was used to versus the other one. Um, but just kind of some contrast that there is a lot going on in the town, even though it's small. So you can kind of find what is more suitable for you. And from there, that was it. It was time. This was actually 5 days of being in Jetty, and then it was time to move on. So, yep. So it says, the good winds brought me here. I definitely agree. I think it was a great place to go to. It's really beautiful all over. There's not too much to do. Well, I guess there is a lot to do, but it's all like a lot of beach stuff, a lot of getting wet, a lot of just hanging out. But it's really, really it was a great time. It's one of the best places I've been to, and I hope to go back there soon. So from Jeri, I had to take the bus back to Fortaleza, which was another 7 hours, and then I had to get on a plane to go from Fortaleza, and then I had to go down to Sao Paulo, and then I had to go back up to Tocantins because there aren't direct flights. So that wasted an entire day of travel, but I really wanted to get to Tocantins because Jeri, I had more of I had more knowledge of Jeri, so I kind of knew what to expect, whereas Tocantins was a little bit something more new, a little bit more unknown. So I kind of wanted to see something completely new and different. So this is the state of Tocantins. It's a weird shape. It's one of the newest. It is the newest state in Brazil. It was cut out from an existing state. The town here, which is the capital of Palmas, was only created in 1988 by decree, and they started building in 1989. And this was also a planned city. There was nothing here before. They built this all out of nothing. Um, but the destination that I was going to was in this area. It's an area called Jalapão, mostly within a state park, but not necessarily. So it's not even at national park status. It's just one of those places that's getting more famous. Um, but the landscape here is called Cerrado, which is a type of savanna. So there's a lot of large rivers and random water holes, and the area is covered with thick vegetation. But these rivers, these water holes, they're all kind of hidden. They're not really visible to the eye. It's just kind of just brush almost everywhere you look. So it looks quite dry. This is actually what it looks like. It's all very sandy. Um, you see that there's a lot of trees, there's a lot of plants growing, but you don't really see where the water is. It's also very, very remote. So getting around the area is very difficult, and going solo is not recommended. The roads are not paved. There's no cell signal almost anywhere except the towns. So if you get a flat tire, or you might be stuck there for hours, if not days. You don't know if someone's going to pass by, especially as the night picks up. So it's always recommended to go with a tour company that's prepared for this kind of outcome. If something happens, they can radio, because they need to use radio, but they can radio for help. Then they know which way to go, excuse me, and they can just take care of things better. So this is kind of the area of Jalapão, not necessarily to scale. And it shows you that there's a kind of attractions that are kind of all over the place. So I tried to do internet research from the US to see which tour company would be the best one to go to see all these random attractions that, like I mentioned, are scattered all over. Um, so I tried to figure out which was the interesting thing to go to, but eventually I just went with one company that kind of had like a large amount of things to see. I didn't want to do too much research and try to see what's better. Is this better than that? Like I said, I wanted something a little bit that was unknown, a little something that would be somewhat of a surprise. Um, but yeah, so I just kind of decided to do this. So Palmas is the one with the star off in the left. So almost everything, excuse me, as you can see, is off in on the right part of the screen, all those points. So I ended up going with a company called Cerrado Dourado, which just means Cerrado is the type of savanna and Dourado means golden. Um, and this was what we were driving in. There was 6 of us per car. We had our stuff at the top and in the back, and there was 2 of these that we were traveling in a little caravan. Um, so they were a little bit more expensive, but still, I decided that it was worth it because it was a 6-day, 5-night excursion, and it cost me about $700 to do this for that time. But it included the hotels, it included the food, so I didn't really have to worry too much about it. The only thing that would be extra were drinks at each place. So this was the group, and we're all kind of standing in front of that cone shaped rock, but that whole area in the background is kind of what's one of the parts that's well known about the Jalapão Park. Um, and of the tourists, the 12 tourists that we were there, 9 of these people are all from Sao Paulo. And of those 9, 5 of them happened to work for the same company, but they didn't really know each other. So that I thought that was kind of interesting that they all worked in the same building in Sao Paulo, but didn't know each other, and they didn't, they didn't arrange any of this. So it was just pure coincidence, and that they ended up meeting on this trip. So the reason that I went to Jalapão and that I even knew about Jalapão was because in 2017 I saw a Brazilian soap opera called Outro Lado do Paraíso, which means the other side of paradise. And it was set in this area. And the cinematography for the landscape was really impressive. It just looked really, really, amazing, that I wanted to see it for myself. So because the soap opera brought the area recognition, there's a lot of tourists, and a lot of places are trying to ride the popularity of the soap opera and have signs up with the logo even now, a couple years later. So here's the map again to just kind of to show you. It just gives you the overview of the region. So what we actually do is actually start in Palmas and drive down and then kind of to the east before doing a loop and returning back to Palmas. So that's kind of the path that we took that was going to take 6 days. So we spent a lot of time in the car. The distances are really long and the road condition is not great. So sometimes the amount of kilometers driven were not very long, but because of the bad conditions of the road or the difficult conditions, it took a lot of time to get around. And this was the reason that I wanted to go. These are a fervedouro, which is a spring that comes out kind of in the middle of nowhere, and they create these little ponds that are in the middle of the thick vegetation. And the reason that these are special little ponds is not just because it's a pond of water, it's because the water is bubbling up and from the springs. So you go in and there is a lot of really fine sand until you walk into a certain point, and then you fall in, and that's where it's actually bubbling up. You can't actually sink in. It just keeps throwing you back out, and it's a very weird sensation. I was the first one to go into these the first fervedouro, so that face I'm making there is because I'm so shocked at what I'm feeling and how how the sand and the bubbling water feels on my feet. So I'm just kind of really, really surprised. So it was just kind of a weird sensation that's hard to explain. And that's why I was kind of like, whoa, what's going on here? And I was kind of yelling a lot. And since I was the first one, I hadn't seen anybody else's reaction to it. So then everyone kind of had that same thing as we all started to go in. So the word fervedouro includes ferve, which means boil in Portuguese, because it appears to be boiling as it bubbles out of the ground. The water does, but it's actually not hot at all. It's usually quite cold water. But it boils. It just bubbles out of the ground. So here's a video that's, I guess, going to be also choppy, but it's trying to show the water that's boiling out of the sand, and that there's little fish that are in there. And if you step in, you actually just pop right back out. So here's another video where I tried to dive in and it pops you right back out. So you just can't go into the water really, because that whole buoyancy thing, it just keeps throwing you out, which makes it a huge attraction. So these, as you can see, are really small. So they only allow a small number of people in at each time. So each group that comes in is given about 30 to 45 minutes to visit. So we had about 12 people in our group, and we are only allowed 6 or 7 people in at a time. So we had to keep alternating within that 30 minutes. And if somebody's already there, sometimes you have to wait for them to leave. So if you arrive and somebody's in, in their 30-minute window, then you have to hang out until they finish up and leave. Luckily, because there weren't too many groups when I went. We only had to wait about once, which was about a 20-minute wait. But most of the time we were allowed to stay a little bit longer. Even if we were there and we had 20 minutes to visit, if no one showed up, then we could stay a little bit longer. And you're also not allowed to wear deodorant, perfume, creams, makeup, hair gel, or basically anything to get the water dirty because there's no outlet. So whatever you take in just stays in the water. So they're kind of there's some places have showers and they want you to shower off before getting in. But yeah, there was a few of these. Going back to the map, there were several of these fervedoros. So there are several of these all over the place, and the tour that I ended up doing, we ended up going to 5 of these. So Rio Sono was the one I showed you before. That was the first one we went to. Then we went to another one that was called Burichi. This is named after a tall palm that you can only see in the shadow of the picture to the left. But it's one very tall palm that kind of sticks up above the others. And the next one was Sesa, or also called Bananeras, because there's all these banana trees that grow all around it. Then there's one that's not even on this map called Macaubas, because this one is recently discovered. This one was kind of interesting because when we got there, we were within our 20-minute, 30-minute visit window, and another tour guide arrived, and it was a tour guide, and he had a couple with him, and they were a couple that had paid for a private tour, and they were also in a hurry because they apparently were Instagrammers or YouTubers or whatever you want to call influencers. And they were in a hurry to get through so they could record something and move on to the next thing because they were on limited time. But our tour guide refused to let them go in, saying, we're within our 20-minute schedule, so you guys have to wait. The other tour guide didn't want to wait. It became a whole thing. But eventually we didn't concede, so we just stayed at our time while this influencer couple just kind of frowned at us. We tried to later find out who they were, but we weren't able to find out who they were, so we couldn't see if they posted anything about us. But yeah, it was kind of an interesting thing because this place is becoming very, very popular with a lot of travel influencers, I guess. So we actually saw a lot of people that were trying to get material so that they could then post on Instagram. And then finally, the last one we stopped at was Fervedoro Bella Vista. So this one here had a hotel that was attached to it where we ended up staying. And because we stayed, we were allowed to go in at night and we had it to ourselves. So we were in there for about 2 hours, something ridiculously long. It was cold at night, so we were kind of shivering, but we still wanted to stay in there because we were like, we don't know when we're going to have another opportunity to do this. And there was we were there in the afternoon when we got there. We went and had dinner, came back at night, swam in the morning, and then the next day in the morning we also swam in the morning before we had to leave. And another one of the things there's a lot in the Jalapão area is the waterfalls. There's just tons of waterfalls all over. We were there when it hadn't been rainy season yet, so it wasn't they weren't at their full capacity, but the different colors of the water and the waterfalls are something that's really, really popular there as well. And most of the places have really clear water, so everything just looks really incredible. I also went whitewater rafting. We did not go down that waterfall, but that's the biggest waterfall, which is called like the Bride's Veil waterfall. And so most of the activities I've shown are all water related, but this is actually the reality of what's out there. There's not much water to be seen other than, everything is around the river, but far from the river, there's just open land. So, don't expect if you go there to see just to see a lush area with tons of water all around it. It's actually quite the opposite. And the roads, like I said, are really, really terrible condition. Um, Something that might be, 10 kilometers on paper actually might take an hour just because how bad the roads are. There was a couple places where we had to go and, reverse and try a different route because the car wasn't going. Luckily, we didn't have too many issues with the car. Um, we were in two different SUVs, and the other driver in the other car was a newer guide, and he wasn't as used to driving, so he did have a couple more issues where our guide had to get out and kind of, help him and guide him through some of these really sandy or rocky areas. And so when I was there was back in, like I said, 2019. I don't know, that was when Brazil made the news for all the fires that were going on in the Amazon. And something that the guide was telling us was that those fires are kind of normal and that they happen all the time. So he wasn't sure why they were getting attention. This is actually, there was fires every day all around us going on as people were clearing the area for farming or to plant stuff. So this one happened to be right along the side of the road, and it's another video, and we'll see how choppy it is. But basically, we just start to drive through something that's on fire. So yeah, that was kind of something that we had to deal with a lot. That was probably the worst one where we actually had to drive through. I was a little worried that, that we were going to get stuck. We didn't know what was going to be on the other side, but he just kind of powered through it, and luckily everything was okay. But it was a bit dicey. But there was fires everywhere around us, always on the horizon. Um, Something else that's everywhere are these water fountains. Um, because everything is so dry and the distances are so large, these water fountains exist kind of almost anywhere you might want to stop so that people can refill their water bottles so that you're never without water in case you do get stuck. At least you've got water while you wait for someone to kind of come give you some help. And everyone kind of carries a water bottle and they're always refilling each stop that they make. And something that also is everywhere are these stickers. People make stickers and then they just kind of post them all over the place. Um, Here's one where people are just stuck stickers all over this gas station. So this was kind of a cool thing that I liked. And here's more stickers. This is also this house that I'm standing on right here actually used to be Pablo Escobar's house. The region in Jalapão is so isolated that this was where Pablo Escobar used to come and package a lot of his drugs. This area is really in the middle of nowhere, but this house happened to have a private airport in the back. It's fallen into disrepair and disuse since Pablo Escobar isn't around anymore. But the house has been vandalized. A lot of the rooms are no longer functioning. They're used to store stuff. A lot of them look like they just have garbage stored in them. Um, you can walk around it, but there's not much to see. It's totally fallen apart. It's in shambles. There used to be a pool in this area. The pool is broken. There was a dance floor. But in an area that's so rural and disconnected, it just obviously this place is just one of those places that's kind of unique. Right now, it just kind of serves as a bathroom break. You stop there and you go to the bathroom and maybe take a rest. There's a couple of picnic tables, but there's beehives that are kind of all over the place. You know, they've kind of taken back a lot of the corners in the rooms. So I was kind of exploring the house, and the bees started coming at me. So I basically just ran right back out because I didn't want to get stung. But another interesting tidbit is that many boys in this area are named Pablo. Um, and I don't know if people know, but Pablo is not a Portuguese name. So the equivalent is Paulo, like Sao Paulo. So to have a lot of kids in this area named Pablo is strange until you realize the connection with Pablo Escobar and the area. So this was another thing that I mentioned already, was that there is no cell service for most of the area. Some of the towns now have cell signal, but that's somewhat recent. So you'll see signs like these that say like this random area that just happens to have a sign that says cell service. So you stop there, and if you have certain carriers, your cell phone will work in this area for, you know, if you stay around there. So people will drive to certain areas like this and just kind of hang out while they get cell service and call people somewhere else or get internet. Um, but yeah, most of the time you're without service, so it's a good way to kind of disconnect from the world. And so it's also a very hot area, if I haven't mentioned that already. It's a hot and a dry area, and every house seems to sell ice cream. So one of the things that I really like about Brazil is that there's a lot of unique ice cream flavors. I don't know if you can read some of those, um, but they're just kind of a lot of stuff that I wouldn't even know how to translate. You know, it's a lot of random local fruit. So I really liked burichi, which is a type of fruit from a certain type of palm tree. But other than saying it's a fruit that grows on a palm tree, I'm not sure what it is. It's not a date, you know, it's some type of similar plant. And this is another thing that grows wild there. It's cashew fruit. I don't know if any of you have seen this before, but the cashew nut is just the top part and the fruit is underneath. Um, so a lot of people like the fruit. You can make juice out of it, and then you can take the nut and dry it, and then have the cashews that we're all familiar with, and they're kind of all over. So these are some that had been picked, and then to the right is one that's growing on a tree. So these were the kind of dinners or that we were or lunches that we had. There was always kind of a self-serve kind of buffet style. We were always asked to grab you know, food, but to not take too much because everybody had to go. Once everyone had to go, you could return and get more if you wanted. Um, the food is home style food, which is mostly what people in the region would eat as well. So it's not, you know, you might see pasta in that left picture, but that's something people normally would eat in the region. It's not like they're catering to the tourists. But I thought the food was really good. It's all mostly simple rice, beans, and meat. Some things like yucca that were in there too, but still usually pretty simple. And the tour guides also provided us with little snacks, with fruit, with crackers, things like that, juice and coffee. So we had a lot of little breaks where they'd prepare food for us. And we had a lot of coffee breaks. There was one point where we had, it was 50 degrees, which is about 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So it was really, really hot. We were supposed to do a hike in the area, but because it was so hot, we just kind of hung out at the visitor center. So I just kind of did like a 5-minute walk, just kind of to look around the area. We were supposed to go into the hills to see some geologic formations, but with the hot temperature, we didn't go in. But I still took my my coffee on the little short walk that I did. So there are more hiking. There's a lot of hiking that's available in this region. The tour package that I ended up picking did not include too many hiking paths. But for example, the one behind me, which is what they call Cathedral Rock, because that white rock looks like the face of a cathedral. You can go in there and there's a whole day's hike that takes you back there. But we just kind of went to the base and kind of looked around and kept going. We did do one hike that was a sunrise hike. We walked up to a hill to just kind of get a look of over the area. So you can see that mostly flat area. There's a few mountains that pop up here and there, but it's mostly just kind of that scrubby, flat land. And there was some optional things that I ended up doing that were like zip lining. So if you wanted to do the zip line, you'd pay for it. I, as you can see, did do it. And again, another video. Maybe next time I won't put so many videos with it coming over choppy. Um, and another thing in the area, again, because of the um, remoteness of it, there are a lot of quilombos, which are escaped slave colonies that are in this area. So these were villages that were founded by escaped slaves, and their descendants still live in the area. So we actually went to a couple of them. A lot of them have little shops for you to buy. Um, uh, I don't know. I'm trying to think of the word artesanato. Yeah, like tourist stuff. Like they'll make little baskets or keychains or things like that. So you can stop there and support the local communities. We also tried some of the food that they make. This is like normal food for them. This is bolinho de chuva in the front, which is kind of like a fried dough balls. In the back, there's a cake that's made with manioc or yucca, and just orange juice that's made from the trees in the backyard with some sugar cane. And this is the kind of stuff that I was talking about. This is one of the symbols, which is called capim dorado, which is kind of a golden grass. It's that little flower that thing underneath it, that stalk, is golden. They sell handicrafts that's made out of this. Um, and a lot of areas get by just with these handicrafts, because it's one of the few things that they have out there, because farming is really difficult there. The land is not very good for farming, but it's kind of what there is for the people that already live there. And the interesting thing is that this plant, Capim Dorado, cannot be domesticated. It needs to grow wild. They've tried to grow it in all sorts of labs and all sorts of greenhouses and all sorts of conditions, and it just doesn't grow. So one thing they have to do is that they need to take care of this, because if they kill it all, obviously it won't grow back. And it is what's giving them a lot of income in the area. So going back to this earlier picture, these are the mountains in the back. This is one of the few places that have big sand dunes. So coming from Jeri, I saw sand dunes all over, but here the dunes are not really exposed except for this one part where this is what the sand dunes look like. So they're these nice, really golden sand dunes. So again, this becomes a big sunset spot. Everyone comes for sunset to take their pictures. It also has a little river that runs by, so it's a really beautiful area. But the people here were definitely not as many as Jericoacoara. There was only about 50 people total, but probably 40 of those were influencers from Instagram. So everybody was out with their camera. Everyone was out trying to take pictures. But this was definitely a really spectacular place. It was amazing. And then everyone just kind of hangs out and waits for the sunset. And, it's just one of those places that's really exotic and rugged. And I think the pictures that I have barely scratch the surface. And I think it's something that needs to be seen in person. I went in with the idea of seeing the fervedoros, and everything else was just extra. And I really was impressed by everything around it. You try to take everything on camera, but it's just not comparable to what it's like being there. And I really liked being disconnected, not having the phone always there, not always messaging. The internet became kind of something that was, every couple of days. So that was kind of cool. And this place really surpassed my expectations, and I hope to return one day. And one of the things that I really like about Brazil is that when you are traveling there, you meet a lot of other Brazilians. Brazilians seem to really like traveling around a lot, and when they travel, they're very friendly. Um, Jericoacoara, which is on the left part, is much more developed nowadays, but it wasn't that long ago that it was a little surfing town that was completely, unknown. It was a national park that limited the growth, that still keeps it a small, tiny town, that gives it a lot of its appeal. The part that there's no paved roads gives it a certain appeal, but with the airport now having flights, things may change going forward. I mean, the flights are still fairly expensive to Jiri, so that might keep things different or might keep things consistent for now, but in the future that might change. Whereas Jalapão is a lot more harder to access. It's kind of a rustic outback vibe, but the locals obviously welcome the tourism because it gives them a lot of economic opportunities that they otherwise don't have. It's one of the few things that could get them out of the situation that they're in now. But we need to see how that will, work out for them going forward. A lot of the places that I went to were fairly new. One of the hotels I stayed at, they were only in their second week of having opened. And they were all pretty basic, but they had electricity, and some had air conditioning, some had Wi-Fi, but it wasn't a complete, luxury place yet, which I think is something that made it even more appealing. So we'll see how that develops and what it becomes like in the future. And that's about it. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Nope. All right. Well,
Alex,
thanks for listening. Yeah.
yeah, this is Danilo. I've been into Jalapão, and the way you describe, I mean, Brazil, the behavior, I mean, everything. I think it's even more accurate than many Brazilians could have, right? So, thanks a lot, man. Great presentation.
All right. Thank you.
Very fun trip. Yep.
Alex is one of the all-star Travelers Brown Bag presenters. I think he's got the best PowerPoint skills of the whole bunch. Not to put anyone
Yeah.
else down, you're all good.
We are having a photos contest in our team in the Americas, but Alex is not eligible to participate anymore. He's a rock star.
I'll share one more last picture, which was completely on accident. This was in the city of Palmas with a 360 camera, and I didn't plan it out, but it worked out to be a yin yang situation here between the beach and the water. So I thought that was kind of cool. That I just kind of wanted to kind of close with. That I think we need to find balance for everything, and I thought this was a good picture to end on.
Alex, we have the Unite team has that photo contest going. You should submit this one. Maybe you'll win.
Danilo just said I wasn't allowed to.
No, right.
Yeah, you're excluded, man.
No more questions from the audience?
Sorry, maybe I missed it, but when did the trip happen?
The trip happened in 2019, and I'm trying to remember if it was October or September, but it was about one of those two months.
Okay, thank you.
which if anybody's going, those months were great. The weather was pretty good in both areas, especially in Jiri. It wasn't too hot. There weren't too many people. Um, so it was just one of those places that it seemed to be the sweet spot of having nice, bright, sunny days. Mostly, mostly being able to be outside, except for that one random day that was 50 degrees. But yeah, it was very, very temperate, very good, good time to be there.
Hey, Alex, I got another question too. You might have already answered this and I missed it, but how long was the total duration of your trip?
It was 2 weeks, so it was 1 week in Jiri and 1 week in Jalapão.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
I'm getting a question from an audience, a participant who is having microphone issues. They want to know how much the whole trip cost.
How much the whole trip? Let me think, because it was about $1,000 for the flights. I'm in California, so getting to Brazil is usually pretty expensive. So anything under 1,000 is a steal because it's usually closer to 2,000 for me. I don't remember exactly, but it was definitely under 1,000 because that's when I was like, all right, I'm gonna pull the trigger and go. The week in Jalapão was a bit easier. It was about 700 for the tour, which included almost everything except the drinks like beer. So maybe another 1,000 total for that week, and it was considerably less in Jeri, because that was a much cheaper place to visit. So maybe about 500. So maybe total 2,500-ish, maybe a little less. But yeah, roughly about that for 2 weeks.
Well, they didn't also then chat me thank you, so I will thank you on their behalf.
All right.
Oh, there it is. There's the thank you. Okay, we're over. So unless there's any last minute questions, we can end it there. Thank you very much.
Can I ask one quick question?
Oh.
Could a non-Portuguese speaker take this trip?
The first place Jeri, yes, it's a little bit more difficult, but a lot of the assistance will come from other tourists, not from the people living there. I met a girl who was from Belgium and she was traveling on her own, and she had a lot of difficulties getting around without Portuguese, but she was getting a lot of help from random people that would overhear. Because like I mentioned, Brazilian people are very friendly, sometimes perhaps overly friendly, but it's kind of something that I really like. Everyone just seems to kind of come to your assistance. And being from the US where people aren't as they're not like that. They, at first it's something that might be a little bit weird where everyone's trying to like come in your business and trying to find stuff out. And they're not doing it to be nosy. Everyone's just trying to figure it out for you. So there it is, because there's a more international crowd, so people will speak English. Jalapão, on the other hand, is going to be a lot more difficult. Very, very, very few people speak English. I think that's going to change, like I mentioned, with the it's kind of the start of infrastructure for tourism there. So a lot of things you can see are getting built. I saw a lot of signs that are in English, but they're translated really, really bad. I actually emailed the tourism office and offered to retranslate stuff for them, but they never responded. But they just kind of, they're trying to make an effort to prepare for international tourism, but I don't know just how far along they are in Jalapão right now to receive, people who don't speak Portuguese.
Great, thank you.
Danilo just provided a resource in the link.
Yeah, it's one of the ecotourism operators here in Brazil that makes this the Jalapão area. So they have like a 4-day rafting going down the Rio do Sono, which is very good. So you go camping every night. I mean, on the river. So, and they take all the equipment and food. So it's a little expensive because it's they bring everything for you. So this is a good way. If you don't speak Portuguese, you can use companies like this. They have like English speakers guides, let's say. So not sure if
Cool.
they have in English the site, but yeah, just a reference.
Thanks,
Well,
Danilo.
thank
Well, when I send out the recording of this, I'll be sure to include a link in the email. So thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. I'll try again. Any last minute questions? Otherwise, we're a few minutes over, so we can call it there. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and hopefully see you all again next month for Singapore.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good job, Alex.
Yep, good job.
Thank-
Thank you.
Bye.